So welcome everyone to webinar number 18, TechKISS, Making Cow Management Technologies Work. My name is Nicholas Lyons. I'm a Development Officer Dairy with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and I'll be your facilitator today. Let me introduce Ms. Pauline Brightling, our guest speaker today. Pauline holds a veterinary degree from the University of Melbourne, but she's worked as a veterinarian, academic, business manager, consultant, and advisor in the ag sector for over 35 years, including some well-renowned international programs such as Countdown and People in Dairy. She is a principal at Harris Park Group, where there is a team specializing in project design, research, training, and evaluation. But she's here today as project leader for TechKISS, a project funded by the New South Wales Government's Dairy Industry Fund, a project that I was fortunate enough to be part of too, together with Pauline. The project was trying to address the myriad of technologies out there and trying to help farmers and industry get what they want from technology. So Pauline will be sharing the insight about this project, including adoption on farm, technologies available, service provider perspective, and the key elements for successful use on farm. So thank you, Pauline, for your time here today. I'll share presenter rights with you, and you will be able to take on from here.
Thanks very much indeed, Nico. So I guess I should ask the question, have I managed the, do I want to leave the webinar? No. Have I managed the technology of my screen okay? And can you see that okay?
We can see the screen perfectly.
Thanks very much, Nico. We're all, I guess, accommodating to working in different places at home and what have you in these slightly chaotic times. So thanks everybody for joining us. As Nico said, I'm going to talk today about the TechKISS project, which ran from the middle of 2018 till the end of 2019. It was funded by New South Wales Dairy Industry Fund. And there were a team of us, of whom Nico was one, and also Anne Hope, who's in my group, and Tom Walsh, who's down at Timboon, and Peter Best, who's done a lot of work across technology, etc. Out of his Innovative Farm Services company. So we had the opportunity to really dig into an area that was of great interest to us. Now, come on, get that. Yeah, so the technologies that we were interested in looking at are technologies that have been around for a long time that we know actually work, that are out there and on farms. We were not, so the scope of the project was specifically auto drafting, computerised bale feeding, inline milk meters and activity meters. And we were interested in what was actually happening on farm with those, as I'll talk about today. Some of those are information generating technologies like the inline milk metering and the activity meters. Some of them are automating technologies like the bale feeding and the auto drafting, etc. And they need the electronic ID of cows and some interaction with herd management software is usually ideal. So we've contexted those four technologies within the context of the EID being used on the farm and also the herd management software that farmers are using. So I guess I'm saying we weren't interested in the new technologies that are sort of breaking new ground. I know there's new stuff happening out there all the time. How can we use new types of soil moisture probes or drones, or we weren't interested in those cutting edge new technologies. We were interested in the ones that had been around for a while, and what we could learn from them. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project itself, about the tech matrix, which is our compilation of all the technologies that are out there within those areas, some of the resources for farmers that we've put together, and also make some reflections at an industry level. So with the technologies that we've got in scope, there's been a lot of work on the widgets themselves and the algorithms that go behind them, etc. So a lot in the technical space, but not as much actual work with farmers, talking to farmers about how they actually use those technologies. And where you do see information, often it's individual case studies with farms, which is really great. But we were thinking that really it would be great to know more at a bigger picture, across a whole population of farmers, what's actually going on. And I think the premise behind the project in the first place was that we were probably at a point that wasn't optimal in terms of use of the technologies, and this is sort of the premise before we started. So we thought that there was, from what we had heard anecdotally, probably a lot of situations where technologies were being used independently and there were opportunities for integration, where there's a lot of data being generated from the technologies, perhaps not being massaged into the information that could be really useful. There was a lot of telling farmers what the tech could deliver, but not actually asking farmers what they really wanted it to do. And stories around only key people being involved, and it'd be really nice to be able to move on farms to having more people in that capacity zone to be able to feel comfortable about using the technology. If our premise was right, that where we were could be shifted to somewhere more optimal, then our sort of objective was to actually identify and share the key elements that would underpin effective adoption of those technologies on farm. So that's sort of where we started from. The opportunity came up to do this work because the New South Wales Dairy Industry Fund provided some support for that, and so the population that we were going to focus on was New South Wales dairy farmers, and we thought that we know that New South Wales is a region, every dairy region is, its own region, has its own characteristics and what have you, and that New South Wales does represent very largely year-round dairy farming, etc. But we did feel that there would be lots to learn for New South Wales itself and also for Australia more generally in terms of the dairy industry if we could look at a large population of farmers. And so that's in terms of scope, we've identified the technologies we were looking at and the population of farmers that we were going to dive into. And we had a fantastic opportunity to talk to a lot of farmers, and we've got a lot of information across the state. So really we set off with three main tasks, which was to ask what products were available in Australia, how they were used, or how many were used on farms in New South Wales, and how it was playing out. So in terms of what products are available in Australia, the task, I initially thought, well, that's a very straightforward task. We'll get that knocked over very quickly. There's an empty whiteboard, we'll fill it. But actually it turned out to be quite a complicated task, and there were many iterations. First of all, who's out there supplying technologies under the target technologies that we were looking at? So who are all the players out there? what are the products? How do we find out about the products? There was a lot of desk audit, a lot of talking to people, finding the key people in each of those manufacturers or product suppliers, finding out about their products, even down to, well, what are the sensible questions to ask them? What should we be asking about this type of technology to actually characterise and be able to describe the features? So what products are available was a multi iterative task, and fantastic input from over 20 manufacturers and suppliers who helped us put that material together. The objective was to provide something to industry and to farmers, particularly farmers who were looking for the technologies, that was pre-competitive. So non-commercial in that sense, so just a pre-competitive opportunity to describe what's out there. The second task, which is how many New South Wales farmers have the technologies and what sorts of things are they doing with them. The first step on that was a survey out to all New South Wales dairy farmers, and I'll describe a little bit of the outcomes of that. And the third part was, well, how is it playing out on farm then? And we had a cohort of 39 farmers. When we finished the project, we talked in detail to 39 farmers. So about half of those we actually went onto farm and visited and walked around and looked at things, and the other half were in detail conversations and interviews. In addition to that, we talked to a lot of service providers and industry experts, and Nico sent me the list of people who had expressed some interest in joining this webinar, and I think as I looked down the list quickly, I saw quite a few people who had actually contributed in. So thank you to you as we go along, and we did talk to quite a few service providers within New South Wales, as many as we could, and also outside New South Wales, because we thought that would also provide reflections and input for this project. So the products available in Australia, just a little bit more detail then, we've coined the term the tech matrix for this outcome in the activities and outcome in the project. It's a bit like Easter. It's a movable feast too. That things change quite rapidly as we were building the list of all the things that were actually out there. So down the left-hand side there, all the manufacturers or main suppliers, and then we've got our target technologies across the top, the four main ones, and the supporting EID and understanding herd management software. And then the question was, what is around? What goes in each of those cells then? And the red ones are products that are developed in an Australian context or a Southern Hemisphere context, if you like. So there's two broad categories of types of production. One is through the largely Northern Hemisphere OEMs who have a whole suite of products that work across each of those areas, and they integrate within their suite. And then there's niche manufacturers or suppliers who are often picking out individual bits of the dairy activity where they think that they can supply a particular technology in. And in some ways, these are the idea is to actually customize them for that Southern Hemisphere environment often. So that was the list of the products that are available. Then for each product type, we went through and said, well, let's have a look at the actual product itself and what are all the different characteristics that it would be important for somebody to be able to have a look at if they were choosing what they were going to use or trying to work out whether it fitted their needs. And I'll try and read the ones across the top. It's a bit hard there, but the key features that, say, for instance, we ended up collecting across activity meters. I think Nico asked people what they would particularly like to focus on, and activity meters was by far the highest. So where I've picked out examples, I've picked out activity meters primarily, but we'll talk about some others as well. But the sort of things that we ended up collecting, who is the manufacturer or supplier, where do you put, where does it place? Is it a collar? Is it a leg tag, etc.? What sort of alerts are available, down to the technical questions around, does it integrate with other kit, and which kit does it integrate with, and herd software, what's the antenna range, what's the battery life at the present time. But lots of iterations going to and fro, sort of making sure we're asking the right questions, getting the right information. So we've put all of that together into a single place, which is a spreadsheet that's now available. So to look at, this is the front page, but to look at any one of those technologies, you just pick the tab at the bottom and then you go into, so if you pick the activity meters tab, you'd see the page that looked like the screen I had on before. Where's it available? If you're a New South Wales DPI follower, etc., you probably go to the website a bit. Under animals and livestock in the dairy part, there's a section on dairy technologies, and you can click through from there to a page that has all of the TechKISS resources on it. And one of the things is the Tech Matrix. So there's a little YouTube clip that talks about how to use the Tech Matrix, and there's a topic sheet as well. But you can click on the button on the lower left-hand side, and that will actually just download the spreadsheet for you. So that's an overview of what is out there, but how many people are actually using what, etc. So we were very keen, as I said earlier, to actually get a picture across a reasonably large population, and we said, righto, let's see if we can survey all farms, all dairy farms in New South Wales. And we did end up sending an SMS to all New South Wales dairy farmers through the great collaboration and participation in the project of the 3 RDPs. So the regional development programs, there are 3 regional development programs that cover New South Wales. Dairy New South Wales in the centre, subtropical dairy in the north, and Murray Dairy in the Riverina area in the south. So all 3 of those RDPs got on board, and they have the contact details for their farmers in their catchment. And we decided, we'd done a couple of different ways of surveying farmers in the past, a really quick SMS out from a trusted source like the RDP, asking for a quick response to a short electronic survey, sort of thing that you can do while you're waiting for cows to move down the laneway or whatever. Went out to all farmers in July, I think, 2018. It was our kickoff activity in terms of being out there with the industry. And it was relatively simple. You could do it in 3 or 4 minutes. We got 102 responses, which is about 15% was almost exactly 15% of the farms in New South Wales that the request was sent to. I was really pleased with that. I was very happy. A 15% response sort of always depends Anne, who's on our team, is the number cruncher and the epidemiologist, and she says, "Oh, I'd like to have 85%." And that's always true, but a 15% response across a large population like that is, I think, pretty strong. The question, of course, is, well, do we have a biased sample? Do we were they particularly people who had technology who wanted to answer, or was it the big farms or the little farms, etc.? We had some surround sound communication about this survey that also went out through the RDPs. So their newsletters, etc., said it's coming and this is what it's about. And we emphasised that we really wanted everybody to reply. They didn't have to have technologies to feel that they could contribute. And in terms of assessing the bias, that's hard to do. The one thing that we did have that we could match up with another data set was the herd size. So across the herd sizes, I don't have a slide of this, but across the herd sizes, the distribution of herd sizes in the respondents almost completely matched the distribution of herd sizes in the Dairy Australia Situation and Outlook report for the previous year. So we thought that we probably had a reasonable go at hearing from a wide range of New South Wales farmers. When in terms of the replies, 40% did not have the technologies that we were asking about, the target technologies, and 60% had one or more of them. And that also encouraged me that we were actually hearing from a slice across the population rather than a particular group. So our assessment anyway, if we take that 102 as representing New South Wales, 40% did not have one of the target technologies. Looking at how many farmers did have the different technologies, so auto drafting 38%, computerised bale feeding 35%, inline milk meters 26%, and activity meters also 26%. When you broke it down by how many of them of the 60% who had at least one, there were 7% who had all four of the target technologies, and then you can see the range there across on the bars. And if you match the colours on the bars in the graphic below, farmers with a single technology, the green ones there, milk meters, bale feeding, etc. The ones that had two technologies in the light blue, three in the orange, and then all four in the dark blue. So you can see that there's a really big range of ways in which farms have actually put together the technologies on their farms. We asked when they had put the technologies in, and I guess one of the things that stood out is that auto drafting and inline milk meters have been around for quite a long time, and most of the farms that are replied to us had those for at least 5 years, and so the majority had, and most, in fact, more than 2 years, whereas the activity meters are a relatively new acquisition on farms. And that probably matches the changes in the technology around activity meters that has moved it to being so much more operative on farms from the old sort of into the Fitbit sort of era, I guess. Other things around the activity meters as an example. So for the each of the technologies, we could see what the distribution was with herd size, and sort of what in this situation, nearly all of them, I think nearly all of them were collars. There may have been one, a very small proportion that were ear tags, but of the ones that answered that, yeah, it was collars. And what they had actually, what they were primarily using them for. In terms of the inline meters, about half were getting volume only, and then mastitis detection was the next add-on to that technology as far as they were concerned, in terms of the features that they had, and 17% reported measuring volume, mastitis detection and components. In terms of the herd management software, there's quite a big range of herd management software that's out there. About half of the herd management software being used in New South Wales is either Easy Dairy and Jantech on that right-hand side are both the local software packages. So in New South Wales, they certainly, the Australian scene takes up a large part of the market. I think the other thing to sort of probably look at is that 20%, so 1 in 5 of the respondents actually were not using any computerised herd management software. So these were nearly all small farms. I think all of them were less than 300 cows, but that I think was quite revealing to us when we were looking at the data coming out, that there was a relatively high proportion, as we saw it, of farms that weren't using, where the exercise book was still king. So insights from those people using the technology. So that just gives us an idea of the what's in terms of being out there, not a great deal about the whys and hows. So the next round was to get some insights from those people using the tech. So this was the interviews that I described earlier. So we had 39 farms across New South Wales, and the opportunity to actually visit with them and ask them responses to a series of questions was fantastic. So we were asking things like what the level of tech integration on the farm was. So this is harking back to that early description of what were the drivers for us in the project, and how the data generated was actually being used, what they wanted from their investment, how comfortable everybody was, and their thoughts and experiences and observations, the tips and traps that they would suggest in practical terms and suggestions for other farmers. I just want to pop this slide up to acknowledge the fact that New South Wales, late 2018 and 2019, was really in the grip of drought, and that many of the farms that made time for us, and they made really great, enthusiastic time, were actually juggling a huge amount. And you know, that their experiences were generously shared, and just acknowledge how tough many of them were doing. So although I picked out quite a few pictures that they're all pictures from the farms, but the pictures that have nice green grass, but acknowledging the ones that were really hitting it hard when we were visiting them in the Hunter, etc., under drought conditions. So of the technologies on the farms that we visited, 10 of the 39 had only one technology, and then sort of playing out as we had had seen with as we were putting the stuff together for the tech matrix, there were herds where they had matching kits, so that was all one suite of kit from one manufacturer, and then there were herds, and there were more herds in fact, that had that mix and match approach. Whether they had 2, 3 or 4 technologies, they were actually putting together kit from different places and therefore facing the challenges of integration. So just use the activity meters again as an example. Fantastic opportunity to really get down to the details with those farmers. So many of them gave us tips and traps that we could share with others. How they chose the activity meters that they used, how much importance they put on integration, whether it was the driver behind moving into technology or whether it was the add-on to something they already had. Quite a few farmers made comments like, you can't get value out of something like an activity meter if you don't have a auto drafting in place already. You know, that's the first thing to go for. Other people said, no, you know, we can put these things in place in different ways. Whether or not they had chosen to buy enough meters to have them on the whole herd, or they would move them between groups of cows, whether they were matching up with other kit that they had, etc. So lots of information about how they went about choosing the activity meters that they used. Signal coverage across the farm, how they managed that, getting signals from neighbours' farms, storing activity meters so that they didn't read signals inadvertently, etc. Fixing issues, whether it was the actual product itself or the background software, having the sort of relationship with their suppliers and how important that was. Quite one farmer who'd been using them for many years said, you know, don't buy on price, buy on the connectedness that you have to the supplier, and talked about how easily and quickly he was able to get support service, etc. So lots of tips around that type of thing too. Talking about work health and safety, these pictures don't come from farms that we went to, all the others do, but we didn't actually get a picture of the sorts of things that people were talking about, getting, you know, hands schmucked if they didn't have the appropriate restraint put in place for cows as they were putting collars on. It's a hard, heads are hard and necks are hard to get to, and making sure that workers really did have approached it with the equipment they needed and the protocols that they needed, and what have you as well. And then how to act on alerts, and you know, every system slightly different, interacting with the herd slightly differently, putting protocols in place, who had the responsibility for activating the alert protocols, etc., and how to get the best out of them. And even just making sure that the right meters are on the right cows and that they're placed in the right places. And that they've been on for long enough that, that when you load them up, you've given the cow enough time to actually set up her baseline. So these were all comments from farmers who were users of the technology, and we looked to capture them for other farmers. So basically, there are sort of two formats in which the resources for farmers are actually presented. As I showed you before, from the New South Wales DPI website, you can click through to a site that's got the YouTube clips and also the info sheets for you to watch or download, etc., and for other farmers. So the info sheet sort of has this type of format, providing farmers with a succinct summary of what the smart parts are to the technology, and some comments from farmers about the benefits and etc. But then on the second page, the sort of list of tips and traps that that they picked out to share. I've sort of focused a bit on activity meters there, but I'd just like to go back to the full set of target technologies for TechKISS. We asked those farmers who were participating to reflect for us on why they were using the different technologies they had undertaken, and very largely the responses were around making life easier. Making life easier for themselves on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, that day-to-day management of cows absolutely was very largely, if not almost entirely, the immediate response. Just looking at each of the technologies then, and I'm just going to highlight, so these are the sorts of questions we were asking them, and just highlight the top bar in each of those, which is, has it made, in your opinion, has it made a significant difference to your farm business? And largely, if you look across those bars, you would say that farmers are happy with what the investment has provided in terms of their farm business. That seems to indicate to me that we have a cohort of farmers who have worked out how to work their technology to their best outcome, and that they're pleased with what the technology does for them. So I guess a bit of a very sort of quick overview. From the surveys and the conversations and the visits, farmers are primarily using those target technologies to automate immediate tasks. They are satisfied with the results, and they've got lots of experiences to share. I think that, you know, was reflected on the last 5 minutes, that they were willing to provide a lot of observation and wisdom. Integration is not a given. Many farmers duplicate their data entry or use the technologies independently, and for some of them, they don't actually care that much, and for others it drives them completely nuts. I guess the thing that stood out for that is that, and I'll reflect a little bit on that in the next few minutes, but looking at the opportunity for integration and then capitalising on that is very much oriented around the time of purchase, and it's harder to do something about it later if you haven't taken it into account in terms of your choice of product. There don't appear to be any independent services to assist farmers to get their purchase or their use optimised. And I'm sort of focusing on the word independent there. Farmers do get a lot of advice from other farmers and from the distributors, obviously, but in terms of independent advice, there doesn't seem to be a commercial appetite for this. And very few farms are using the data to do anything in terms of analysing their herd's performance. And I guess the line there, this is where the real gains in productivity could be made. So if we're really interested in making a difference, this is a place to sort of to drill down. In terms of the service providers, We talked to 35 service providers, vets, nutritionists, herd improvement people, and industry experts. And as I said in the opening, most of those were in New South Wales, some were outside New South Wales. We asked them about how much they engaged with the technologies, whether their clients asked them about the technologies in terms of putting them in and using them, etc., and whether they could find a way of supercharging or advancing the services and advice that they offered if these were in place on farm. So could they get the data out? Could they use it, etc. In large part, the answers to those questions were not terribly bouncy. Most of them said that data access was too difficult to get the best out of the technologies that were on their clients' farms, and either they couldn't get the metrics that they wanted, or they couldn't get the data that they wanted. I think the summary on that would have to be that many advisors have little direct engagement. They're on the farms, and that's fine. Primarily, they use them to get a list of cows for preg testing or for AI or for whatever, but they find it time consuming or nearly impossible to extract the data, and they don't get what they need from it. I think this is that really stood out in terms of the conversation with the service providers. So that leads me to reflections for industry, and should just spend a couple of minutes just reflecting on what at the bigger picture then, if we can get a sort of bird's eye view of this across a population and in deep dive on farms and with the service providers, what could we say to industry at that level? What did we learn? 7 points that we could just make some reflections on. Let's just work through them with that. Farmers use the technologies for day-to-day management. So they pick out the lame cow, they assign the right feed level for a cow for her stage of lactation, they pick out a cow for mating or preg testing or whatever, and they're very happy with what happens in that context. So they're satisfied with the technologies. They do cow-related jobs well. There's no sense, and this is an industry implication, there wasn't any sense that there was a need at an industry level to do any more development of those widgets. It's a commercial activity. It's not a high priority for industry investment within the target technologies. The second one is that the tech matrix shows the products available in Australia now at a pre-competitive, non-commercial way, lays them out. It provides a way of sort of triangulating the features, etc., and looking, people who want to use those products are going to need to do something of that themselves, so that is there for them to use. It's easily accessible. I just noticed that the one that I've got, the one I had up before, had November 2019 in the top left-hand corner, and I've got October on this slide. So that reminds me to say we kept it up to date for all of the 2018-19 time that we were working on the project, and there were many opportunities to update it, as people helped us with that. It is a very dynamic space. If farmers find it useful, then industry will need to keep it up to date. And I think, Nico, you've got that on your shoulders at this point in time, but I guess the key question is making sure that there's engagement to be able to do that. Integration of tech on farm is best considered at purchase. There's the list again. If you're, as I reiterate, if you're buying across a suite, it's likely to integrate. If you're buying products that are more from the niche areas, producers, you've got to actually find out what matches and what doesn't. So go down in the next layer to find out what matches and whether or not that's important to you as a farmer. The opportunity for integration through DataVat, which is the centralised data repository that DataGene's working on, is an industry response to one of the ways of helping with integration. And if that can come to fruition, I'm sure that will really aid. But I'd say at this stage that our observations within the TechKISS project are that commercial drivers do limit integration of technology outside the proprietary ranges. People want farmers to buy within their suite, etc. And DataVat would help with this, but there wasn't much sense from any of the service providers that we talked to that they were seeing that happening in the short to medium term, and that may be the reality. There's no independent tech support services, so most farmers rely on other farmers, manufacturers and distributors for advice and support and training. That covers a lot of what is needed, but some industry training packages can provide useful generic information, and I guess this TechKISS suite is part of the contribution into that. Herd level information could help improve productivity, and there's sort of no doubt that although the use on farm is individual cow management, actually asking questions and getting answers around groups of animals or whole herds is so important in terms of productivity. And if it doesn't happen, what's the risk if it doesn't happen? If you miss the key alert to some herd level problem, or if you don't have the evidence that you need to make a change that will significantly increase productivity, then it's a big gap. So farmers need information at the herd level to drive productivity, and a focus on herd level data analysis and interpretation is something that we should be really looking to underpin all the productivity research and extension activities that we do, which leads into a question around metrics. So I think the sixth one is advisors are finding it hard to get the metrics they need. There are a lot of dashboards and a lot of elements being produced in different products, etc., but they're not standardized, and it's very hard for the service providers to know how figures are calculated, what's in the denominator of that group. Is a cow in or out of that? How do I actually interpret that for my farmer client? So I'd say that we'd have to reflect that the cow management technologies we looked at are not really providing a bounce in advisory services around animal health performance, particularly in the context of that herd level productivity. Which leads into the last reflection, which is the use of industry agreed metrics. And our observations are it looks like the use of industry agreed metrics is in this animal performance area is actually diminishing, which is a warning flag, really. To have a good understanding of what's happening in the herd or the industry as a whole, actually. You could look at this at a herd level, or you could look at it as an industry graphic. You need to be able to collect and collate data easily. you've got to have an understanding of what's relevant for Australian herds based on the evidence base, the science within the Australian scene. You've got to have metrics that are transparent and with standardised methods of calculation, etc., and specify which animals are in and out, etc., and interpretable. And then you've got to have a wide understanding by farmers and service providers of what those metrics mean and how to act. So there's got to be utility available at farm and industry level. And to put all of those things together, you actually have to have the leadership to make it happen. So there's a lot of stakeholder engagement and sort of oversight with that. I just nearly flicked onto that picture there. 10 years ago we had Countdown had the mastitis focus report set up, which provided herd level measures for monitoring and troubleshooting mastitis. And that was used throughout the industry, and I think is still being used to some extent. A similar example is the Genetics Progress Report, providing an industry-generated overview of the outcomes of genetic decision-making in the herd. And that can also sort of inform at the industry level. You can make a comparison with something like Dairybase. If you've got everybody using a different chart of accounts, it's very hard to actually get a unified view. But if the industry sets up and actually provides a single industry agreed approach, farmers can access benchmarking and the industry can get an overview as well. So it's the type of investment that is terribly important. In terms of the reflections from TechKISS, when industry provides those key metrics, then management advice to farmers can be science-based, and the industry has got the information and the know-how to support the RD&E that it invests in to enhance that as well. So, industry generated reports supported by strong programs in the key areas are really a fantastic way to go if you can, or develop indices and provide those specifications to the software suppliers so that they use those standardized and transparent metrics. So last slide, second last slide. The technologies are out there. We don't need to, as an industry, we don't need to do work on developing them. Be useful to keep the tech matrix there. Reminding farmers about integration is really their point of control is point of purchase. Data VAT would help a lot, so we hope for the tyres pumped up on that. Generic training is helpful. Doesn't seem to be a lot of interest from farmers to pay for a one-to-one independent service. We need to pump up the tyres on the herd level focus for these technologies to get the benefits that we could get out of that. At the moment, that's a job to do. That's a job ahead of us, and we're not getting as much out of the advisory area as we could. It would be fantastic to support that with science-based metrics. So hopefully I've probably gone longer than I should. Sorry, Nico. Hopefully I've said a bit about the project and the tech matrix and the resources and where you can find them, etc., and made some reflections there. Thanks so much to the 141 farmers and 20 tech suppliers and 35 advisors and experts who shared their ideas, and of course to the sponsor. Thanks, Nico.
Thank you, Pauline, for that. Look, I think it's wonderful the amount of information that you've captured and we've captured through the project. I want to acknowledge your leadership in bringing the team together and driving the project. And there's a lot of useful information there that I think will help and support the industry moving forward. We did have a couple of questions come forward, and I'll just put them through to see if we can tackle them. The first one is 20% of farmers have no herd management software. Why? What is the barrier?
As I said, nearly all of those were farms at the smaller end of the range. I don't think there was any farm over 300 cows that was in that group. I suspect that they did not feel the trajectory forward for them was going into a computerized environment when they had been doing their work pen and paper for a long time, but we didn't get the opportunity to talk with them directly to find out the why in that space. In terms of the farms that we actually interviewed that did have technologies, some of them were farms that we were referred to by the ADPs and others. The department dairy officers as well knew people who they thought would be really useful to talk to, because we wanted to get down into the depths of the whys with them. And some of them were farmers who on the first survey ticked the box to say they'd like to talk more about it. So in terms of getting into the whys, that was that group. And we didn't have anybody in the group that didn't have herd management software in place who ticked that box. So we didn't end up having an in-depth conversation with them.
Yeah, that's fine. And we need to acknowledge that that was not the main kind of question of the project. It's just that it gets, I think, everybody's attention that 1 in 5 farms still use pen and paper as king.
Mm-hmm.
The other question is, for farmers that had computerized bale feeding, did they make decisions to differentially feed individual cows, and how often?
Yes, the computerized bale feeding was about providing an individual ration to a ration to cows based on their individual characteristics. So their stage of lactation. The most common activities were things ramping down for drying off, ramping up after calving, so sort of stage of lactation decisions. I've got to remember now, but I think that I can't remember if we had any detailed information about how often they made those decisions, but they were often getting information from their nutritionist, which they were using. There was a relatively high engagement with information being supplied by the nutritionist for them to actually put it in. And I think it was, they were making quite regular decisions, but I actually can't remember the data on that.
That's fine. But I think the good thing is that it was a combination with the service providers in many cases. The other question is, Pauline, the usefulness or payback on these technologies depends largely on how the farm or farmer uses it. What learnings or advice do you have for industry and farmers evaluating technology options?
We didn't look at the return on investment question. That is an important question in terms of an individual farm making a choice to actually to put the technology in place they have to have a sense of what they think the payback will be on their farm, and they're quite complex questions at an individual farm level. Largely, the farmers who had taken up those technologies saw that the payback was around ease of dairying. So reduction in labour costs was a significant part of the picture, and increase in their ability to feel comfortable that they could be off farm, that other people could find cows that needed to be found in ways that they would not have been as confident without the technology. So the question of what actually constitutes a sensible decision on each farm is I think still and it's an individual farm issue, and yeah, I don't think we could do at an overall industry level. We couldn't give advice that this will or won't be the right thing for you.
Yeah, but it's interesting also to see that not when you look at why farmers invested, sometimes increasing profit does not appear. So it comes kind of sideways from reducing costs. But there was no kind of clear message of increasing profit. It was more around the flexibility, the labor, the systematizing processes, or the likes.
Yeah, I think there were certainly instances where farmers were very pleased with their investment in computerised bale feeding, say for instance in terms of being able to manage their feed ration compilation, and felt that they'd made good productivity gains as a result of doing that. And similarly with the mastitis detection, but it was largely around making changes for individual cows rather than looking at it at a herd level.
Excellent. Pauline, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I think you've provided a huge amount of insights. As you've mentioned, probably this is the start of future projects that come as we move forward, because I think there's a lot of things to explore even further from here. So I do want to thank you very much for the project, for allowing me to be part of it, but even more for sharing the insights today with the audience.
Thanks, Nico.
So for all of you online, if you want to follow or join our initiatives, the two best places to do so are our Facebook page, New South Wales DPI Dairy, and our newsletter that goes out 4 times a year. So if you go to bit.ly New South Wales DPI Dairy News, you'll be able to subscribe to the newsletter. For those of you that want more information, our website is an excellent point of contact. As Pauline mentioned, in the dairy technologies section, you can access all the information that Pauline highlighted today, the tech matrix, the videos, the tech sheets. So please don't hesitate, jump online and hear more of what we're doing. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining, and hope to see you next time. Bye.